Manifesting your specific person is as easy as manifesting a cup of coffee. And I know some of you are going to be thinking of like, yeah, right, Maria, I don't believe that. Well, if you don't believe me, I to go into much more detail in my first video. I'm going to link that below. So let's get into it. I manifested him. I didn't even know I was doing it. Like, I literally was talking to his cousin at one point and even tried hooking him up with one of my best girlfriends at the time. And when time came to us dating, no one cared. Everyone was so excited for us. And how did I do it? Well, I always had a crush on him, so I was always living in the end of us being in a relationship. I didn't mean to. I mean, he had a girlfriend when we first met. And eventually, what happened? The girlfriend was gone. All the perfect circumstances literally lined up into a bridge of incidents, and I manifested him. So in the last video, I left off talking about how I called him to make sure we were okay because we had all hung out that night at a pool hall that was very popular when I was younger. And I just remember feeling really uncomfortable. And I was just like, let me talk to him. I want to make sure we're cool, even though obviously our dynamic and our relationship had changed, right? Like we had gone from being friends to at least friends with benefits for that moment. And I called him and told him, hey, I don't want things to be weird. Like, I want us to stay friends. And he basically told me, well, I don't want to stay friends. And I go, neither do I. And he goes, well, then we don't have to. And we ended up dating after that. So our relationship was really great for like, I'd say like 4 or 5 months. And then, dun, 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 I noticed that him and his cousin had been hanging out with these 2 girls. You know, back then, like, he was like super hot. He drove a Camaro. He was a huge player before we had dated. And even when we were dating, like, I already knew at that time, because I was only 17 and he was 19, I knew he had dated a lot of girls and that he had a lot of girlfriends and he had a lot more experience than me. And it didn't bother me because like he treated me really well, and I honestly had pretty decent self-concept back then. It wasn't like I doubted myself or didn't think I wasn't good enough. But as soon as him and his cousin started hanging out with these 2 girls, one really pretty blonde girl that was into his cousin, the one that I like was talking to at some point, and this other girl. I remember she was like the complete opposite of me. Dark hair. She was, I think, of Korean background. She was really pretty, but I was so intimidated by her. Like, the moment I met her, I was just like, she wants him and she wants to be with him. I'll like never forget them all walking in together like as a group, and we were meeting up there and me just being livid. I remember just thinking to myself, like, who's this bitch? Like, who the hell does she think she is? And she was all over him, like flirting with him, being real cute. And I remember we got introduced at one point. He's like, babe, this is my friend. Said her name. And I'm like, hi. And she's like, hi, really nice to like meet you. And I remember just being like so disgusted and so triggered. And it was in that moment I started to believe that he had feelings for her and that she liked him. So what happened after that? Well, we got into a huge fight. I was super mad at him and I just thought it was bullshit, honestly. I'm like, why are you showing up to the place that we go to with another girl? And he's like, babe, it's nothing like that. It's just a friend. Like, I'm just going along with my cousin to help him get this girl. I think the girl that the cousin was into, whose name was Brittany. And I was super annoyed. I didn't believe him. And I'm like, you have to like her. And he's like, yeah, she's really pretty, but it's not like that. And what happened after that? He started getting distant and weird. I'll never forget, like, after that, I actually ended up going with a couple of my girlfriends out of town for a trip, and he didn't want me going. And he's like, well, if you go, we're gonna break up. And I'm like, why? I'm not gonna cheat on you. Like, he's like, well, what do I know you're gonna be doing on this trip? And I'm like, seriously, like, I'm so into you. What do you think I'm gonna do? Or I went on this trip, he's like, I think we should go on a break. And I'm like, but why? Like, I don't want to go on a break. And he's like, promise me while you're gone, you will not contact me. Like, you're just going to give me the space I need so I can figure out how I'm feeling. Because he was really annoyed after I like got upset. And I mean, honestly, I had all the right in the world to be upset. The things that were going to come after that, my little heart couldn't prepare, because it was my first boyfriend. It was like my first everything. So I end up going on the trip with my girlfriends, and we end up having a great time. And yes, am I getting hit on? Did I actually act on any of that? No, I was like a good little girlfriend. I mean, sure, I flirted with some guys. Who doesn't when you're that age? And plus, there's nothing wrong with flirting. I remember when I was there, though, I missed him so much, and I was really triggered by everything that had happened. I'm like, oh, what if we break up? Like, I'm so upset. I don't want this to be the end. Like, I really love him. And at this point, he didn't know that I was like totally in love with him. I ended up calling him, even though I had promised I wouldn't. So while I'm on the trip, I'll never forget this. We were at some mall in like Montreal or something that was connected to our hotel. Oh, I don't remember what the hotel's name was, but I remember we were like getting Starbucks. And I remember being like to my girlfriend, I can't stop thinking about him. My friend's like, don't call him. Whatever you do, do not call him. And I'm like, oh, come on, it can't be that serious. Like, I miss him. I want to talk to him. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to call him. I pick up the phone. I dial. He answers. And he's like, I thought you were on your trip. And I'm like, I am. I just miss you. And he's like, I miss you too. But I thought we were going to take this time to have some space. And I was like, but I really wanted to talk to you. And like, I don't want to leave things the way they were. It doesn't feel right. Like, I really care about you. And he's like, I care about you too. And he's like, babe, just give me some space for right now and we'll talk as soon as you get back. And literally it was only like a few day trip. So I agreed. I hung up the phone, and of course I was devastated. I'm like, oh my God, he might want to break up with me. Like, what am I going to do? And at this point we were dating for like, I think like 5 months or so. And I was really worried. So what do you think my mind was infiltrated with? Thoughts about the third party, the thoughts about him and this beautiful girl, this thoughts about what if he's cheating on me, what if he's gonna break up with me, right? Like, I felt super insecure. I felt not good enough, and that's all my mind was on. Like 24/7. The rest of the trip I was miserable. I was sad. I couldn't enjoy myself. The rest of the trip I just kind of moped around and couldn't stop thinking about him and the fact that we might break up and that we were at this weird point in our lives or in our relationship. So I come back from the trip, we have a conversation. He's like, he seems like pretty normal, like not that bad, but I could tell something was up. So I'll never forget this and the day that it happened, because it was literally like the worst day of my life when I was that young. I remember him being like, babe, we need to meet up. So we met up at our local mall, which was like one of our meeting spots and places we would go, and we met up in the parking lot. And I dressed like total shit, meaning like sweatpants, because I was like super depressed, and like at this point I don't even think I was eating. This is how upset I was. Like, I really did believe that we were gonna break up and that he was gonna leave me for the third party, or he was gonna end up dating her, right? That maybe he wanted to be with her and not with me, and maybe everyone was right, like he's a total player and he can't commit. So we meet up, he hugs me, we start talking, and here's a really messed up part. I knew he still cared about me. So I was getting this very like hot and cold version of him, right? Like, we meet up, we talk, and it's just like, I don't think this is working. You know, I care about you and I don't want to break up with you, but I don't feel like I have a choice. So this is a pattern that's repeated in my life more times than I want to actually count. So we meet up, right? We're having this conversation and he's like, I care about you. I don't want to break up with you, but I don't feel like there's another choice. Maybe we can work things out later. And he's hot and cold. He doesn't even know what he wants to do. And I remember at one point he starts crying. He's like, I care about you so much. You mean the world to me. Like, I've never felt this connection with anyone. And this guy's like crying and breaking up with me. Like, he literally thought he had no other choice. So we break up, he's crying. I'm confused as F, right? Because I'm getting this weird version, like in the beginning of the conversation, it seems like we're not going to break up, and then he wants to, and then he feels like he has no choice, but then he cries because he cares about me so much. And it's because my emotions were so back and forth, like, oh, he does want to be with me. No, he doesn't. Like, throughout this conversation, I was shifting in and out of different states. So was he. He was reflecting that back to me, like, instantaneously. So we end up breaking up, right? And then a couple days later, about a week later, I ended at the pool hall knowing that I was going to run into him. And who do I see? Him And who do I see in his Camaro sitting next to him? That really pretty girl. And I was like, oh. And not only did they walk in together to the pool hall, they were holding hands. I was devastated. I remember just being like, that mother. He broke up with me so he could be with her. It was everything that I was freaking out about, right? Remember, whenever you're entertaining anything in your mind, it's what's being pushed out. I had a boyfriend that cared about me, that was in love with me, that treated me really well. And then the moment I made this woman more important than me, they both had no choice but to act that out in my 3D reality. All my friends were like, this is bullshit. How dare he bring her here? Like, oh, like, you gotta be effing kidding me. They were all, like, a lot of them were really mad at him, actually, because we would all play foosball at the foosball table. There was, like, a group of us, like, of couples that would play, and I remember everyone being like, did you see he walked in with another girl? And I was like, yeah, I know. And I tried to play it cool. Hi, how are you? I remember I ended up leaving and like crying into a pillow. I think later that night I actually went home and like broke a vase that had all these flowers that he had given me, and I shredded a teddy bear he had given me. Like, that's how mad I was. I'm like, that liar. It was pretty bad. It was ugly, to say the least. So after that, you know, I kind of accepted that he was dating this woman, right? And the strangest thing happened to me. I'll never forget this, because this was about, I don't remember, maybe about a month or so after this had happened. I was preparing to go on this like religious retreat. I'm Greek Orthodox. They have something called Goya. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but it's Greek Orthodox Youth of America. They have like youth groups, and we were going away for the weekend. And I was super excited to like go away, but I was so depressed. And I remember as I was getting ready that day to like have my stuff ready for the weekend, and I was on my way to school. I'll never forget this. I'm driving and I'm just getting so depressed, and like I'm heartbroken. I can't get over the fact that he's with her. Like, it's known, like everybody knows that they're dating, right? Like, it'd been a couple weeks, almost like a month at this point. And the strangest thing happened. My intuition started playing a song that I knew really well from childhood. I'm sure most of you have seen Cinderella. And the song, "A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes," literally was stuck on my head and repeat, like it wouldn't stop. And all I kept hearing was, "A dream is a wish your heart makes when you're fast asleep." And the part that really stuck out was, "In dreams you will lose your heartache. Whatever you wish for, you keep. Have faith in your dreams, and someday your rainbow will come shining through." And then the one part goes, "No matter how your heart is grieving, if you keep on believing, a dream that you wish will come true." And I'm just sitting there really listening to the words, and I'm like, why is my mind so fixated on this song? Like, I think it was like 2 days of me hearing this song right before I'm about to go on this retreat, and I'm just like, what's going on here? And in that moment, it was like intuitively I knew that if I focused on something else and not on what wasn't making me happy, I would get him back. I just started to believe in that moment after that song played in my mind. I'm like, you know what, this is impossible. I'm in love with this man. We're meant to be. In that moment, I made the decision that we were meant to be, that we were fated, and we were going to end up together no matter what. Literally. So guess what? I made that an assumption. Like, me and him are going to be together no matter what. I don't care who he dates. I don't care how long we've broken up for. I'm in love with him. And there's a reason I'm hearing this song. I was a big believer in signs back then. And my intuition was like, my higher self was basically telling me, girl, don't be upset. Like, if you want to be with this man, you will be with this man. You desire this man for a reason. Let's say boy, because he was only 19 years old at the time. But I knew in my heart that I desired him for a reason. So after I made that decision, it's weird. My mind like stopped thinking about the third party so much. Not that it didn't come to mind. Of course it did. Like, it was still a circumstance in my face. I didn't know Neville Goddard back then. I didn't know law of assumption. But I remember that what I would start doing was anytime I missed him and would get really sad, I would just imagine he was there with me. And it wasn't something I did intentionally. It was just, it would make me feel better. So every time I'd be thinking about him and her and how I was so depressed, I would just imagine him in front of me being like, no, dude, I miss you. We're gonna end up together. You got nothing to worry about. And even when I ended up on this retreat that weekend, the whole weekend, all I kept imagining was he was there with me, that he was, I mean, at the time he was 2 years older, so he wouldn't have been allowed, but I just imagined he was there with me, eating with me, hanging out with my friends, having conversations. So I was literally living in the end of us being together without even knowing it, because it gave me relief. It was like the one thing that could take the grief away of losing him and being so sad and missing him. So no joke, I did this for a few days, and I got a call from my girlfriend that weekend. I remember the morning that this happened because I'll never forget. It was pretty insane. I remember I had to take like a really cold shower that morning because we were at like this weird retreat place in Wisconsin where all the hot water was gone. So I had to take a cold shower that morning, and I ended up fainting. And that morning this was like the third day of the retreat. So I was supposed to be going down to eat, to be with like, you know, the church people that were looking after us, like the priest and like the, I don't know, you would call them like the chaperones and the other kids. And I'm just like, and the other like high school kids that were there with me. And I remember after I passed out, I just let one of the chaperones know, I'm like, I don't feel good. Can I just relax? And she's like, absolutely, don't worry. Just like lay in bed, sleep as much as you can, and just hang out. Cause like I freaked out. I like passed out for the first time in my life. Like, and I think it was because I was so upset. I think I had like a mini panic attack over him. So I'm laying in bed and I take a little nap, and then I literally fell asleep just imagining like he was cuddling me, because it was giving me comfort in that moment. So about, I don't know, 45 minutes later, an hour or two later, after waking up, after starting to finally feel a little bit better, I wake up to a phone call from one of my good girlfriends. And she's like, oh my God, you like won't believe it. And I was like, what? And she's like, I saw him this weekend and he wasn't with his girlfriend. And I was like, wait, what? Do you think they broke up? And she's like, I don't know. Oh my God, he like wouldn't stop talking about you. Like he wouldn't stop until I told him that you were like away for the weekend at that like Goya thing. And I was like, really? What else did he say? Just that like, he doesn't like seem happy. And I'm like, wait, what? She's like, yeah, I asked him like, why isn't she here? And he's like, well, I don't want to bring her. He's like, I really wanted to see Maria. And she's like, well, you need to like not have a girlfriend and be looking for Maria, because that's not fair to Maria. And he's like, I know. He's like, I just miss her. And I'm like, wait, what? He said, what? She's like, girl, he misses you. He was like looking for you all night. Like, I think he came just to see you. And this was like a bar that we would go to on occasion that we would be able to drink underage because we would never get carded. And when I heard that, I was floored. I was like, oh, he does miss me. We are meant to be. Oh my God. Little did I know that that would be a bridge to my incidents, because what did I continue doing? I continued believing that we were meant to be. I'm like, it doesn't matter. I mean, look, he's like going to places without his girlfriend looking for me. Pfft, this is in the bag. They're going to break up soon. Like, I really did believe this. And the crazy part was, it was the same thing for me, right? Like, I didn't know I was being on a mental diet or living in the end, because when I would think about him and I would get upset, I would just live in the end instead. I would imagine us together. After I found this out, it was just more proof for me, right? That he missed me and couldn't stop thinking about me and wanted to be with me. I mean, come on. When it starts getting reflected back to you in your 3D reality, you're like, yay! Even though I didn't know that, for me, it was proof that he obviously missed me. Wasn't necessarily proof that he'd break up with her right away, but I knew that at some point we would end up together. It was like my conviction. I'm like, there's no way I heard that song. There's no way he's telling other people that he misses me and is showing up to other places looking for me. Like, it's done. Like, he wants to be with me. So I continued to live in the end. So what ended up happening? Did I run into him a few more times with her? Yeah, I did. But he kept looking at me. He even 2 weeks later, I don't know if you are going to believe this, but because I seemed to persist in the end, despite the fact that I was triggered and I did not like that this woman was that this girl was in the picture. He ended up calling me on Valentine's Day. I'll never forget this. I was at my girlfriend's house and I was like, oh my God, can you believe he just called me? I called him back, and what do you think he told me? He goes, hey, how are you? And I'm like, I'm good, how are you? And he's like, I just wanted to call you today to see how you're doing. And I'm like, well, why are you calling me? Like, I'm confused. Like, don't you have a girlfriend? He's like, yeah, but I miss you. And I want to wish you a happy Valentine's Day. He had a girlfriend. He was thinking of me, though. And I'm like, but this isn't, I'm like, wait, this is bullshit. I'm like, you have no right to tell me you miss me if you're with someone else. And I really laid into him. And he's like, Maria, honestly, it's just, I still care about you and I still have feelings for you. I don't know how I feel about her anymore. And I'm like, wait, what? And all I said to him was like, okay, I'm like, but listen, you can't be saying things like this to me if you're still with someone else. Like, I'm not okay with that. And you need to make up your damn mind. And he's like, I know, but I do miss you and I think about you. And I'm like, I think about you too, you know, like, you meant a lot to me. And he's like, me too. And I'm like, and I remember I was real brief with him and my girlfriend's like, let him go. Because we were at my girlfriend's house at the time. We were like on our lunch because we were allowed to have off-campus food. So we would go to her house and raid her parents' cupboards because it was free. And I remember just being like, oh my God, like, what do I do? And she's like, no, unless he breaks up with her, you keep your distance, you can act cool, but no, that's not okay. So after that, I kept running into him at the pool hall. Remember, we had mutual friends, so we would talk and stuff like that. And a few weeks later, it was around like 5 or 6 weeks later, because this was Valentine's Day, the same thing was happening. He was staring at me more and more, and I could tell that they weren't doing well. Like, it seemed like they were fighting. The last time I saw them together, it looked horrible. Like, this was early April, so this was like, what is that, like 6 weeks after that phone call? He ends up driving her home early and then comes back to the pool hall. And I remember, and I saw him and I was like, is everything okay? And he's like, no. And I'm like, what's wrong? And he's like, me and broke up. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. That must really suck. And let me just tell you, on the inside, I was like, yeah, dance party. They broke up. I knew they'd break up. Like, 17-year-old Maria was having a party in her damn head. So excited and so happy that they broke up. And it was all because I believed we would end up together. I persisted. Sure, I kept seeing them together, but I gave it no meaning because I believed it. I'll never forget that night because we stayed there like way longer than normal, and I even had school the next day. I think this was like on a Thursday, and we talked for hours. And I was just there for him as a friend, you know, nothing crazy. It was just him being like, you know, I've missed you and I'm glad for being here for me. And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, it's hard breaking up with anyone. He's like, yeah, she just wasn't for me. She was too jealous. And he's like, she hated you. And I'm just like, right? Like, I didn't care. I was like super excited because they broke up. So we ended up talking that night. And then after that, we continued to stay friends. So after that, we started talking a lot more. He would call me and we would hang out with the group and meet up at that pool hall pretty often. And I remember there being a girlfriend being there like, I know exactly how to get him back, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and you're going to listen to me, and you're going to get him back. And I'm like, okay. You think people have their own free will, and you don't know everyone's you pushed out, right? You do whatever you can, especially when an older girl is giving you advice, and you could see that her man's like wrapped around her finger. Of course you're going to listen to her. She kept telling me, you don't always want to be there for him. You want to be busy. You don't always want to answer your phone, and that I should be a little bit more elusive, sweet but kind, but like not always tell him like if I was going to end up somewhere or if we're going to be at the same place, and not talk to him the whole night like I used to. Because like after that night, every time I would see him, I would have a long conversation and we would flirt. And she told me, she's like, no, don't do that, because then he knows you're really interested. But if you're kind of more aloof, he won't know, and then he'll chase you, right? I believed if I acted and played these games that he would fall for me. Listen to her advice, and what do you think started happening? We started hanging out more. We started flirting more, and he even started calling more. He seemed way more interested than before. The incidents ended up of us hanging out more, right? Me being kind of distant, but being more confident and just being like, of course he wants me, and unconsciously living in the end because that was the only thing that gave me relief. And then eventually we ended up going to this same party. It was like someone's house party. I'll never forget this because it was like one of his guy friends that was throwing the party, and I got invited somehow. And I remember I knew he was going to be there, and I dressed in like this really cute white dress because it was right after one of my friend's graduation parties. And he like wouldn't stop staring at me. He was flirting with me the whole night, and he even got mad when other guys were trying to flirt with me. He's like, dude, that's my ex-girlfriend. You're not allowed to flirt with her. Of course, booze got involved, and we ended up making out and like sleeping together in a bed. I mean, it was a bridge. I may have not knew the how, but I let things unfold naturally. And that's why I think things manifested so quickly for me back then. After this party, I played it very cool, and my girlfriend that was giving me advice told me, okay, you guys messed around. Now you gotta be like really like cool with him and just like act like you don't care. And what do you think I did? I acted like I didn't care, and I continued to fantasize about him in my mind, right? Like we were already together. After that, his cousin started liking one of my girlfriends, so we all started hanging out a little bit more. And it was very clear that she was kind of iffy about him, but not sure. And they all eventually ended up at a party that I didn't end up going to. And the crazy part was he didn't want me to go. And he actually begged my friend not to bring me. He's like, I don't want to bring Maria. I don't want to confuse her. Like, I know that like stuff has happened between us, but I don't want to give her the wrong impression. And my girlfriend's like, that's total bullshit. And of course she told me, and I was devastated. That fucking jerk, like I've been there for him. Like we made out a couple weeks ago, and like we're cuddling in bed at that party. Like, you gotta be kidding me, right? I was livid, but I didn't let that bother me. I mean, even though it did, and I felt a certain way about it and I got it out, I still persisted. I was like, that doesn't matter. We belong together. We're gonna end up together. I don't care if it's a month from now or a year from now. That boy is mine. Like the song, I don't know if you guys remember that song. It's really old, from Brandy. I just remember thinking, that boy is mine. Fast forward a couple weeks later, I get inspired action to go to a foam party. I don't know if any of you know what that is, but back in the day, like I would go to these underage parties and they would have foam parties. I dressed super cute. I wore a bikini and I wore a cute little dress. And I remember I ended up going with one of my guy friends, and I really wanted to go. And for some reason, I had a feeling I was gonna run into SP. I just like knew it in my bones. And what do you think happened? I end up going to this foam party, and in the middle of it, I'm like hanging out with my guy friend and a couple of his friends, and we're dancing. And mind you, I was the only girl with all these guys. And SP walks up and he's like, what are you doing here? And I was like, oh, I came with Mike and my other friends for like the foam party. And he's like, that's awesome. He's like, how weird that we're running into each other here. And I'm like, I don't know, it's super weird. And that night, we spent the entire night together holding hands, just like we had always like been in the past. Like it was like we were together. And that night we ended up like all leaving together and all hanging out at a party. We ended up spending the entire night together, literally the sun coming up. Ended up literally watching the sunrise together with all the friends and all hanging out, and it was a lot of fun. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, wow, how was it? Like I had this feeling I was gonna see him, and I had this feeling we were gonna end up hanging out, and I just had this feeling it was all gonna work out. I just trusted my inner intuition, despite the fact that I hadn't seen movement, despite the fact that a couple weeks earlier he didn't even want me coming to the party, despite the fact that there was a point where we didn't see each other so much, right? Like this wasn't a perfect journey. Fast forward, after that we were like pretty much inseparable. We were always together. Like we would go to the mall together. After that, I remember we even ended up going to a festival together holding hands. And everyone's like, oh my God, Maria, blah, blah, you guys are together, so excited. Like all my friends are like, oh, you were right, like you did get back together. Yeah, I told you we'd end up back together, duh, because it's meant to be. All the normal things that couples would do, right? Like going to hanging out at his house, hanging out with our friends. Like it was pretty obvious that we were dating. We weren't official. And a few weeks after that, we ended up going to this underage club. We would go to a lot of those back in the day. And we ran into one of his friends, Mike. We were hanging out with him. And I remember Mike being like, you guys should just get back together already. You guys are just so cute. I looked at him and I'm like, yeah, we could, or we could wait. And he's like, or we could. And I was like, okay. And that night he kissed me and I was his girlfriend again. And we dated for a few more months before my self-concept went to shit. And then we broke up again. But, you know, moral of the story is, it is as easy as manifesting a cup of coffee. We just complicate it. Imagine if 17-year-old me knew that he was just me pushing out my belief. The moment I made the decision that we were meant to be and I just kept living in the end because that would get me out of grief whenever I would think about him, was the moment everything changed for me, because he started acting differently because I was different. And it didn't matter what I saw externally, it was what I felt internally. I just knew. I didn't care. And now you know the full story of how I manifested my first boyfriend into my life despite him having a girlfriend, and then just manifested a third party and us breaking up and us getting officially back together. I think it's also important to remember to trust your natural impulses. Like, there's a reason why you're being told to do certain things. Like, remember when I went to that foam party, or to listen to that Cinderella song. Moral of the story, manifesting a specific person is as easy as manifesting coffee. And remember, everything is always working for you, not against you. Like and follow to learn manifesting the right way.